I may have been wrong, and I got to be man enough to admit it because with 2 weeks left to go in the NFL draft, a lot of us, me especially, pounding the table saying Tetairoa McMillan, Arizona State wide receivers, number one guy, top 10 pick. You got to go get him if you have the chance. Steve Smith's podcast is making me start to rethink that theory and rethink what the Saints may need to do in this draft, looking for a big bodied physical wide receiver. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. So I've been catching up basically since last weekend, the last few weeks of Steve Smith, ex-NFL receiver, like we said, from Carolina, and the Ravens, breaking down the wide receiver class. And his breakdowns are kind of causing me to pull back a little bit from my initial, analysis of T-Mac, which went along with kind of everybody else. Like there was really very few dissenting voices. Then they started to kind of creep in. Golden and some other guys were possibly overtaking him for that first pick, but with no real explanation why until Steve Smith, and I started watching his videos on YouTube from his podcast, started seeing some things clicking and going, I can kind of understand. That's his website on YouTube. The videos are down there. Just wanted to show you that and give him credit for a lot about what I'm about ready to talk about, but really to encourage everyone watching this, go watch his stuff. It is so good that, yes, I could do what a lot of YouTubers do and show the clips and then stop and talk over. And I am not getting in between Steve Smith in this conversation. I think he does a very great job of laying it out. And more so, I don't, looking at the comments and what other people have said about it that I know have watched it or have told me about it, I think it's still a little open for interpretation, what they're actually talking about, and that's okay because it's an analysis and it's representative of what NFL teams have to do when they have to try to figure this stuff out. So, if you don't want to watch the whole thing on any of these videos because they are or any of his videos, sorry, because they're quite long, at least go watch his film breakdown because he's going to lay out in those breakdowns a lot of what I'm going to summarize and present to you. I think you kind of have to start in his video, um, basically titled "Is McMillan Overrated?" It's an attention grabber to go watch, and he's got some points in there. One of the other than the actual video breakdown that he does, and he has chapters so you can click directly ahead to the points I'm telling you I'm going to talk about. But in that McMillan video, at the 9-minute to the 16-minute mark, it's labeled Steve's thoughts, and he brings up a couple of key points in here outside of his film review. The first one, and I want to be very careful how I say this, but just as a quick summary overview, this is one, it's a long conversation, and you really need to go watch him and James Palmer, I believe, is his co-host, going back and forth. But basically describing, going back to last year, the number one receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr., I remember the story, and the narrative was he told NFL teams, I ain't doing any of this combine, pre-draft bullshit. I'm going to get ready for the season. Y'all know what I can do. They put out there from their sources and people they talk to. That's why I want to be very careful in this because I'm giving you secondhand, basically secondhand information. But what they're saying is two things. One, McMillan tried that this year and was possibly told, no, buddy, you probably want to go to your pro day, do some drills, do some running, some of the stuff that they wanted checked. And the other thing they brought up was from their understanding, that narrative that I was talking about that I thought I knew last year, here's another thing where I was wrong, was not the case. That in fact, what they were saying was Marvin Harrison asked NFL teams, and a large number of them came back and said, no, bro, you don't have to do any of that stuff. We know you're fine. And he was like, cool, deuces. I'm going get ready for the season then. So take that any way you want to take it. But I do think it's an important part of the conversation for the next part that they talk about. And here's another thing I was wrong in. I'm racking up the wrongness in my thinking. We all know, we've all seen when wide receivers check out of a game, when they're just getting shut down, can't get the ball their way, and this is nothing new to anybody who watches the game closely. They check out, and you got to try to get them. You got to get them involved in the game. We've all heard those conversations by announcers talking about it because they're seeing the same thing we're all seeing. And I'm not saying every wide receiver does this, but a lot of them do. Where I was wrong was I'd have bet anything in the world that Steve Smith was never one of those guys. And in this section of his thoughts, he starts it off with the credibility of going, I was one of those guys. I had to go against back in the day when the rules and the style of play of the NFL allowed a true shutdown corner, like a lock on a receiver and make him like he's a ghost. He doesn't even exist. Like Darrell Revis, Patrick Peterson's another one he mentioned. He rolled through a few and went, I had those days. I had those days where I was blanketed. I was not involved. They couldn't get me involved. And the reason why he admitted to that, he goes, because I want everybody to know I can recognize it because I've done it in my career. And he brings up the Colorado game. Now, he says, I've watched it on film, but he doesn't do a film breakdown in this video of it, but mentioned a very similar situation that he's saying, I saw it, I recognize it because I've done it. He shut down in that Colorado game or checked out because they were shutting him down. And I believe he finished that game like 5 catches, 34 yards, something like that. So he was shut out. But their conversation took an interesting turn when they admit it. It happens. It happens a lot. And it happens, a lot of receivers. And some, in Steve Smith's case, like me, I wouldn't think ever did it. And Steve Smith acknowledged what ultimately happens is you finally get a ball coming your way for the first time in the whole game. And then his words, then you panic. And then you're trying to catch it against your chest. And because you don't want to drop it because you finally got a chance. So he's admitting to a lot of stuff here that he's saying, I saw McMillan do it. But the interesting take on this is admitting that a lot of receivers go through this, that in the pre-draft process, this is where the meetings are so important, is getting on the one-on-one interviews, job interviews, basically with the players. Because what they're saying is teams need to get T-Mac in a room and bring that up to him and ask the hard questions about what happened in this game. And they even brought up the fact that at that point, if you're a player, you got 2 options. You tell the truth or you lie. And just leave it at that. But it was a great conversation. And that's kind of the things. And I'm not saying that McMillan, and I think some people inferred this from that conversation, is he'd be the guy, oh no, that their point is it happens. He showed it. Teams need to do their due diligence and find out exactly. But my take on that was people like me were not even remotely exposed to that part of the game and how he would respond to it, in that it is important because at least, and look, he's not the only one, and he's probably not the only one that Steve Smith's going to call out on it when he sees it, but saying, hey, that's something that needs to be addressed by every NFL team when you see it show up on film. And I can't disagree with that. And I don't necessarily know if that hurts his draft stock or not, but it takes me off the peg that I was getting sucked into, like I said earlier, hey, he's the guy, pound the table, don't worry about it. I think their point is that could be true, but you can't take it as gospel. You have to go in when you see stuff like this, whether it's this or something else, as a team that's interested in burning, in the Saints case, number 9 overall pick on him. Do your due diligence, ask the tough questions. At about the 33-minute mark in this video, very much towards the end, they do the comp. And they were talking about that a lot of people, and I was one of them because I kept seeing this over and over, the comparison of McMillan to Drake London. And Steve Smith kind of shot that down because what was being presented throughout this video is that as big as he is, and his best attribute, according to Steve Smith, is his size, but he doesn't always play physical. And there are times when he needs to be more physical and he's not. And that's in the film review. And that's why I'm telling you, you really need to go watch what Steve Smith says on some of this stuff. The comp that they kind of come up with is AJ Green. Now, this is Steve Smith's word. He said finesse receiver. I think of the word finesse, I'm thinking soft, but I know for a fact they're not calling AJ Green soft. And despite the fact that we're saying, well, McMillan may not be the physical presence everybody is assuming, in my case, he ain't soft. He can get physical and do some stuff. But I think the point that they were trying to make is that AJ Green was a complete receiver. He could get physical with his size when he needed to, but at the same time, and I think this is where they're coming with finesse, is he could use his speed, explosion, his technique, his footwork, his route running, all this other stuff to get separation. And one of the things that just bugged Steve Smith about McMillan was he did, as athletic as he is, he didn't really have those tools to get the separation in the same way AJ Green could without being physical. And he needs to, right now at least, be more physical to get that separation. One of the phrases Steve Smith brought up in this is that one of the reasons why his contested catch rate is so good, and he's great at it, and he can go up, and he is freakishly athletic, is because he can't separate, and that defender's always on him, leading him into a lot of positions where if he had some of the other tools, or he got physical earlier in the route, is one thing he brings up. And he wouldn't have had the contested catch situation necessarily. Might have been able to spring himself open and make life easier on him, the quarterback, and everybody. That is a grain of salt. It's something to throw on this conversation and go, never really thought of it that way. Because they mention in a lot of the recaps about him and his lack of separation, but almost as a blow it off, it's not a big deal because he's so good at contested catch. Steve Smith also brought up about his lack of being physical. When he was physical at Arizona, he brought up the point, look, you have to realize the NFL is going to be a little different. You're going to run into more and more guys, and even smaller guys than you are in stature, who are really strong and have really good technique. And when you come to get off the line or you come to get in your break or whatever, they're good enough and strong enough to get their hands up real quick on your chest and knock you off whatever you're trying to do. And that sometimes you have to be physical with them first to make sure that doesn't happen. And he sees that as a possible issue. They acknowledge, like I said, not only his leaping ability, but his speed, his athletic ability. They talk a lot about one thing he's really, really good at is yards after the catch. When he can actually get some space and catch a ball and not making a contested catch, he can make some stuff happen afterwards. And using, well, if that's going to be your game, develop more of that as the way you're going to create the separation and get open and possibly become more of a complete wide receiver like an AJ Green. So I get the gist of the conversation. The other video about Higgins, they actually have a little section in there where they compare the two, and there's another one on Higgins at the 9-minute mark where they're talking about him being a first-round steal. And my take on all that is when they're comparing the two, Steve Smith's best attribute for Higgins is being physical. And they're hearing around the NFL. In fact, Palmer said, I had some NFL coordinators tell me, please don't let Steve do a video on Jaden Higgins because we don't want teams that aren't clued into him, get clued in and possibly start moving up the draft board into a spot where we're not going to be able to get to him. The comparison between the two is, and it basically boils down to this, is Steve Smith is looking at Higgins and going, Higgins physically, his physical ability and his size, which is close to McMillan's, he does all the stuff I wish McMillan would do. And that's really the comparison point between the two. And the reason why, again, I really hope, I strongly suggest you go, you know, give yourself a little time in the day and start rolling through some of those videos from Steve Smith's podcast, or at least listening to him. But you really want to see his film breakdown. You you want to be able to say, we know what this prospect is. And the takeaway that I got from that, he, I know what Higgins is. I know what McMillan possibly could be. But right now, I'm going to use the word like in between, like a tweener. Like he's not fully on the physical guy that Higgins is. He's not fully on that. If you want, I'll use his word finesse. Um, that more finesse, which a lot of other receivers in this draft are. They're going to do that kind of stuff to get open and not have to, quite frankly, because they may not have the size to be the physical guy. They have to go the other way. And it almost, my take is Steve Smith's like, he needs to pick a lane on one of the two, and that's what he is. With we always talk about the ceiling, that make that his floor. We know what he is, but with the ceiling on him being, you can go develop good wide receiving coaching and work. You can develop the other skill set, and then you're a complete number one receiver. A lot of people watching these videos, and I've seen that. I think we even had a little talk on this, on the live stream last Monday. Is well, he's saying Higgins is better than McMillan, and I'm like, no, I didn't get that from him. In fact, his own big board on this he's got go. He's one of the people that has put Matthew Golden as number one. He still has McMillan second. He has Higgins at 8. Besh, Harris. That's a couple of guys who fall into the realm of kind of what Higgins and McMillan are doing. But I think his point in using Higgins is, and you have to we also have to remember that this big board that he's doing, that's all encompassing with receivers. We're just not specifically focusing on that single one trait. But I think his overall point is, and my impression, not putting words in his mouth, if he did the physical style that Higgins does, Jaden Higgins does, I almost get the takeaway that he would be willing at that point to go, well, McMillan is your guy. That's what he's going to do for you. That's what his floor is. All NFL teams need that guy. And then when he adds the next part of his game, then he's the complete receiver. I can be physical. I can be, again, Steve Smith, finesse, whatever it takes. I can do it. Then hell yes, he's definitely a 9 overall pick. He's a top 10 pick. He's a guy that's eventually going to be a 1, a top level 1. My mistake was assuming when people were talking about him that all that was already there, and it may still be. I understand this is one man's opinion, but I have to respect who the opinion is coming from, and the fact that sometimes people go along with because they don't want to be the one voice or dissenting opinion on something. I can tell you, if you know anything about Steve Smith, he definitely ain't that guy. 0 F's given. He's going to tell you exactly what he thinks, and I respect that. So I have to pay heed to it, and that's, you start thinking along that line. Two things happen. Is one thing is an offshoot of this, and in my recent mock draft, I had this in the back of my head the whole time when I did the whole trade down mock draft, winding up with that second round pick and looking at, man, I got a shot to get Higgins and Jackson. 2 problems solved. Big physical wide receiver, offensive line help. Boom. I don't even know if that thought process would have been in my head a week ago before I really started getting into this of what Steve Smith was putting out there. I think it's very, very important. The other thing I've been trying to do, and I can't nail it down because there does not seem to be a absolute definitive list of Saints prospects, these rookies, who's got top 30 visits, private workouts, who they saw and talked to in pro days. You get little clips and blips of it here and there. So since it's not a definite list, I can't say for a fact that as far as the top 30 visits, because even that seems to be not released or readily available, that you kind of hear somebody said, oh yeah, they're in these NFL reporters reporting on it. So I don't know. I can't find anything that gauges the Saints' interest in like a McMillan or Higgins as far as stuff like that. But I can tell you, oddly enough, the way this stuff kind of works out in the last few days, there is a big physical receiver that the Saints are bringing in on a top 30 visit. I think actually today on Thursday, that all of a sudden you're looking at him going, is that going to be their plan in all this? That guy is Arkansas wide receiver Isaac Teslaa, and we're going to talk about him in just a second. So Arkansas wide receiver Isaac Teslaa first caught my attention watching SEC football the last 2 years. He was a guy that, you know, you'd notice him at some point during a game, but he was never like the number one for Arkansas and just blowing up all over the place and drawing a lot of attention around the conference, much less around the nation. And I honestly didn't know that much about him, but you could at any point watch an Arkansas game and you'd notice him at some point and go, man, that guy's pretty good. But probably not think too much of it afterwards. Next time I really anything was watching the Senior Bowl coverage. He showed up there and started flipping some heads and drawing some attention and getting some mentions. And I went, oh yeah, I remember that guy from Arkansas. I'm going, huh? He's making a name for himself when he's supposed to. The very next summit was March 1st when relative athletic score, which the Saints are huge on. So whenever these popped up on Twitter, I'd bookmark them. Well, he gets an amazing 9.97 out of 10. It's an insanely high relative athletic score, RAS. And it was a little incomplete at the time because if you notice, well, first off, he grades out for them elite at size, explosion, speed, and in his agility, he only comes in great. That cost him the perfect 10. If you notice the gray boxes, that's either kind of estimated or they don't have anything at all. I do know I saw where I believe it was at his pro day or some workout day. He finally did bench and he did 17 reps at, I think it's 220 is the weight they use on that. That's kind of really awesome for a receiver. So his strength score might have went up once that was added. I don't know if he did an official 20, the 10-yard split, or why they have that grade. But at this point, when you're looking at everything else on him, especially being 6'3" and 214 and scoring all over the place like that, you're kind of going, yeah, whatever. We're pretty good. Like I said, it is well known how much the Saints love that RAS. And so when I saw they were bringing him in this week, I'm like, okay, let me go find out the rest of this guy's story. Turns out he was a high school quarterback. Now, I don't know why he wound up at, God, I have to look this up. Hillside College, very small school, right? So I don't know if he was recruited as a quarterback and just didn't find a spot, if he was overlooked, whatever. But he spent 3 years there at Hillside as a wide receiver. Then the last 2 years at Arkansas, 2023 and 2024, the 2 years at Arkansas combined numbers, played 25 games, started 17. He was kind of their number two. Total of 62 catches, 896 yards, 5 touchdowns with size. And like I said, I think that athletic ability that this RAS is showing might have been why I could, hey, look at that guy type moments when you were watching an Arkansas game. Also did some returns for Arkansas, some return ability. So he gets to the Senior Bowl, turns some heads. This is parlayed into some interest around the NFL, parlayed into the Saints are bringing him in as one of their top 30 guys. I kind of get the impression day 3 guy, 5th, 6th round type pick. So I mean, we're not getting all excited about the next, you know, DK Metcalf or anything like that. That the Saints are about ready to draft. But I do think it's interesting. He comes in as one of their top 30s with all this in the bank, as far as, but he seems to love his athletic ability and showing some physical play. Think back earlier when I said, since there is really no official list anywhere that I can find saying, okay, these are all the top 30 guys the Saints have brought in. These are all the meetings, private workouts, the pro days. We've got glimpses of it, like I said, but no definitive list to draw from. So from what I could do over hours of just trying to find out, I don't know if we've had any hard contact with a big physical receiver as compared to the quarterback work we've done, for instance, and some other positions. Defensive line, we've done a lot of work. We've done a lot of work with the offensive line. Hearing very little about this. One conclusion that I can draw from this, we just paid Juwan Johnson a lot of money, too big to be the big pass catching tight end de facto wide receiver, right? Well, that might be the plan. And they're not really interested in looking for the wide receiver version of that, like we all think they should be, going, now we really believe in Juwan Johnson. That's why we paid him. So, let's look further down the list. We're not going to invest high draft picks in this area, but we got these 6 and the 7 down here floating around, 2 fourths even, to start off day 3. Might be searching for guys like this. Saying, look, we're going to develop them and see what we can do. Or even as an undrafted free agent, at least he's coming in and they're getting a good look at him for that. Even if he isn't drafted, going, well, if he's not drafted, maybe we can bring him in as a UDFA. So just pointing that out, that the one confirmation we know of big-bodied physical receiver with some kind of freakish athletic ability is this young man Teslaa from Arkansas. Not the bigger names we were just talking about are showing on Steve Smith's big board from the top 10 guys. Don't necessarily know what that all means, but there it is. So what I got for you today, my mea culpa, because I may have been selling y'all on, T-Mac as the guy, and he could be. But, like I said, in Steve Smith's breakdowns, it presents a case where I'm kind of thinking maybe we get him off, and that's why, if you noticed in that the last couple of times I've talked about what to do at 9 and who's the guys I really, really like, in a short span of time, just a couple of weeks, I've kind of backed him off of that. Not willing to give up on him as a top prospect, but I just hope the Saints, if he is on their radar, and we just don't know exactly, they ask the tough questions. They figure out the stuff that Steve Smith says, hey, you better know about this guy if you're going to want to go ahead and draft him that high. But the simple fact that Smith left him as his number 2 overall guy leads me to believe it's just some more boxes you got to check. But his point is, you damn well better check them. And I can't necessarily disagree with that. So first time here, if you like what you saw, please go ahead, subscribe. Everybody give me a thumbs up. Let me know down in the comments, does this back you off McMillan further? And I think some people have. And look, Higgins, that this is what got me to Higgins. And the possibility there may be a few other guys that could be the way to go if the Saints are still willing to use a pick. Maybe not first, but a second or one of the thirds, whatever they're going to do. I think this is one of those things where we thought the case was closed, and I've been saying this throughout this whole, since combine, basically. Long way to go to draft. Things can change, and this may be one of those change scenarios. So what we got for you this week, I'll be back and seeing you on Monday. Until then, I'm Tim. Peace out, and who dat?